Jealousy is an emotion as old as time itself. It's an emotion that usually develops from anger, embarrassment, and the fear of being abandoned. While it's often viewed negatively, being jealous of something or someone may have some surprising benefits when managed well. It can keep us motivated for self-improvement, pushing us to address areas in oneself where we feel lacking. But despite all these, there's a reason why many of us see jealousy as a negative emotion. More often than not, jealousy leads to negative consequences. It can cloud your judgment and fuel destructive behavior. Sometimes, people do things they would never even have considered under normal circumstances, all because jealousy has taken hold. This is a powerful emotion that can distort reality, leading to irrational decisions and even heinous acts of crime. This was tragically evident in the case of Christine Lee Silawan, a 16-year-old high school student from Lapu-Lapu City in the Philippines. As dawn broke on the morning of March 11, 2019, the residents of Lapu-Lapu City in Cebu began their day, each turning to their usual tasks. Amidst the quiet routine, a villager passing by an open field noticed something unusual on the otherwise desolate stretch of land. From a distance, its silhouette resembled nothing more than a torn-up cardboard box. Parts of it were pale brown, while other sections were stained red, which created a puzzling sight against the barren landscape. The villager initially dismissed it as discarded trash, but something about its shape nagged at his mind. After a moment of contemplation, he realized that the object couldn't be a cardboard box, because at the tail end of the object, its shape suggested something longer, something that disturbingly resembled a pair of legs. Compelled by a growing sense of dread, he moved closer. From this moment on, Lapu-Lapu City would be transformed into a hunting ground, with the community united in the search for a dangerous criminal. Because each step that the villager took, the mysterious object became clearer and more focused in his vision. When the true nature of the object finally dawned on him, he was confronted with a sight so horrifying that it stopped him in his tracks. Overcome with shock and fear, he urgently called for others to come. There, in the field, lay the lifeless body of a young girl, naked from the waist down. Her face was so brutally disfigured that parts of her skull and eye sockets were exposed. This was a crime that was unlike anything they had ever encountered before. In fact, it was so vile and brutal that the victim's name became a forbidden keyword on search engines after this discovery. The investigation into a gruesome murder would soon reveal a harrowing story of jealousy, deception, and unimaginable cruelty. And as the details unfolded, they painted a chilling picture of the extreme lengths to which envy and obsession could drive someone, culminating in an act of sheer horror. You're listening to a special edition episode of Heinous, brought to you by One Up Media. This episode may contain sensitive details and graphic imagery. Listener discretion is advised. As the sun began to rise on March 11, 2019, the villagers could hardly believe what they had stumbled upon. The field where they stood had once been a cherished spot for young couples to enjoy romantic picnic dates and leisurely strolls. But now, it has been transformed into a somber crime scene. In the very spot where many couples once sat, lay the half-naked, mutilated body of a young woman. As the police arrived and began to usher the villagers away from the body, it seemed as if they already had a sense of who the victim was, because the whispered rumors among the crowd all pointed to a shared, unspoken knowledge. The officers moved swiftly, setting up a perimeter and covering the body with a sheet. Amongst themselves, They exchanged knowing glances and hushed conversations, piecing together fragments of information. But amidst all the rumors and chatter at the time, the officers likely suspected that this grim discovery was connected to the details they had gathered the night before. March 11th, 2019 was a Monday, and the day before was Sunday, a day of worship in the Philippines. Nearly 90% of the population in the Philippines is Catholic, and it is customary for families and individuals to attend Sunday Mass as part of their practice. Each week, churches fill with people dressed in their Sunday best, singing hymns, and participating in sacred rituals that reaffirm their faith. However, this Sunday was different. On March the 10th, a day before the tragic discovery, the congregation had dispersed from attending their usual church services. But hours later, the police received an urgent report about a missing young woman named Christine Lee Silawan. Christine was a 16-year-old girl who lived with her family in the east of Lapu-Lapu City. She was the second child among her 3 siblings, and reports state that she shared a special bond with her mother. Her older sister, who was significantly her senior, was a teacher at a local school, while her younger siblings, aged 13 and 14, looked up to Christine with admiration. A 9th grade student at the Maribago National High School, Christine was known among her friends for her kind and joyful spirit. Her mother also fondly recalls how Christine aspired to be a flight attendant when she was young, and how she would often share her dreams and ambitions with her younger siblings. Records also say that Christine was an active volunteer at her local church, the Sacred Heart Parish. She was deeply involved in religious activities and was a familiar face at the parish. Her routine included attending church every Sunday from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., a commitment she rarely missed. However, on March the 10th, Christine failed to return home after Sunday service. This deviation from her routine immediately caused her mother, Mrs. Silawan, to become deeply concerned. Realizing that her daughter was not home at the usual time, Mrs. Silawan knew that something was wrong and, gripped by growing anxiety, headed to the local police station to lodge a missing persons report. By evening, Christine was still nowhere to be seen, and her mother's concern had evolved into a state of alarm, setting off a frantic search throughout their tight-knit community. As more hours passed without any word from Christine, news of her disappearance spread rapidly through the village. But despite this, night had fallen, without any sign of the young girl. United by their faith and fear, the community prayed fervently for her safe return. But what nobody knew was that by this time, Christine was already in grave danger. On Monday morning, just hours after the first sighting of the body, the crime scene was already teeming with local residents. News of the gruesome discovery had spread rapidly, drawing many curious onlookers eager to understand what had happened. By this time, the body had been covered with a white sheet, but the scene was far from contained. Each gust of wind would lift the sheet, revealing glimpses of the body that was underneath. As the villagers exchanged speculations, the sense of collective shock and grief deepened. Many had already begun to suspect the identity of the victim, but all they could do was wait for the police to confirm it. When the autopsy report finally came through, it unfortunately connected the dots. The mutilated body of the young woman in the field was indeed Christine Lee Silawan. We will delve into the full report, but please be advised that some of the information is extremely unsettling. The autopsy reported that she had been stabbed a total of 27 times. Among them, 9 were on her arms and 1 was on her neck, which was considered the likely cause of her death. Additionally, her face had been physically cut and peeled off from one side to the other, leaving parts of her skull exposed. Even more harrowing was the fact that some parts of her upper organs, including her tongue, windpipe, sections of her neck, and her right ear, had been gruesomely removed. Some speculated that her body, having been abandoned in the field, might have been scavenged by wild animals. This would have explained the horrific injuries to her face and neck. However, This idea was met with skepticism. Experts pointed out that it was unlikely for wild animals to confine their feeding to just her face and neck without leaving marks on the rest of her body. Then it was found that a strong acid may have been poured onto her face before it was peeled off, which explained why some pieces of her flesh were burned. This was the strongest evidence to suggest that someone must have done this on purpose. Further medical examinations later revealed severe abrasions and bruising on her private parts, indicating that she had been raped. The police theorized that extreme force must have been used on Christine's body, as there were clear signs of both internal and external bleeding around her private areas. Before the autopsy had been finalized, the sight of the body was so gruesome that it left several residents severely traumatized and physically ill. But after the report came out, some residents were so affected by it that they were unable to consume meat for the next few weeks. At the same time as the release of the report, images of Christine's corpse began to surface and circulate online. Some of these images, however, were uncensored, which exposed the full extent of the brutality inflicted upon her. The graphic nature of the photos left many netizens severely traumatized, as they struggled to process the horrific reality of what they were seeing. Additionally, the widespread sharing of these distressing images sparked a wave of outrage, which only further deepened the sense of horror and grief surrounding Christine's tragic death. On March 23, 2019, Christine was laid to rest at the Catlea Cemetery in Cordova town. The atmosphere was heavy with sorrow, as family, friends, and community members gathered to say their final goodbyes to the young girl whose life was brutally cut short. One poignant photo from the funeral circulated online, capturing the raw, unbearable grief of her mother, Lord Silawan. In the image, she is seen leaning over Christine's casket, her face contorted in pain as she sheds tears for her daughter. Christine's funeral marked a moment of profound mourning for a community united in grief. Yet, amid the tears and sorrow, there was also a palpable sense of urgency. Now that Christine had been laid to rest, it was time to seek answers. The community, along with the authorities, were now more determined than ever to bring justice to Christine and hold those responsible accountable for their actions. The only pressing question now was, who could have been capable of doing such a thing? Jonas Martel Bueno, a 62-year-old criminal who was previously charged with the brutal murder and skinning of a farmer, had already served his time in prison for his crimes and was now a free man. The gruesome details of Christine's death bore a striking resemblance to Jonas's case, leading many to speculate about his involvement. Additionally, there were rumors about Jonas's past crimes, that he and his brothers were members of a cult that reportedly required its followers to eat human flesh. This macabre detail only fueled the public's fear and anger, intensifying their demand for swift justice. Almost immediately, social media was flooded with posts accusing Jonas of being the perpetrator behind Christine's murder. The eerie similarities between the two crimes only fueled public outrage and suspicion, and Jonas was now the #1 suspect in this new, horrifying case. When Jonas was arrested, he found himself reeling in confusion. Believing his days in custody were behind him, he was dumbfounded to be accused of murdering a girl that he claimed to have never seen, heard of, or met before. To Jonas, these accusations seem to have come out of nowhere. But we've seen this before, haven't we? When most criminals are caught for the first time, they instinctively deny their involvement, hoping to escape trouble. It's only through intense police interrogation and pressure that they crack and confess. However, this was not the case for Jonas. He was indeed innocent. After a thorough investigation, the police determined that Jonas was not their man, and he was subsequently released. With their initial suspect exonerated, the police now face renewed urgency and pressure to find a new suspect. This was when they stumbled upon a crucial piece of evidence that may have just led them to the actual killer. Days after Jonas was released, investigators uncovered disturbing CCTV footage that captured Christine walking with a male companion on the night she was believed to have been killed. The grainy video showed Christine and the man together, but the camera angle only captured their backs, leaving the male's identity obscured and providing the police with a frustratingly incomplete picture. Despite the unknown identity of the male, the footage offered a critical clue. Christine was seen walking beside him, displaying no signs of distress or coercion, which to the police suggested that she was comfortable and familiar with the man. With this footage, the police now had a significant lead in their quest for justice. However, since the camera had only captured the back of the man, they still needed to determine his identity. The police decided to search Christine's social media for clues, focusing particularly on her Facebook Messenger. While going through her conversations, they identified two of her chats that could potentially lead them to the culprit. One of the individuals involved was a man named CJ Diaz, who appeared to be a new romantic interest, while the other was John, her ex-boyfriend. The investigation started with John, as since he was her ex-boyfriend, authorities speculated that the crime may have been motivated by a desire for revenge following their breakup. The National Bureau of Investigation, or NBI, discovered that John and Christine had dated for nearly a year before she ended the relationship just days before her murder. They theorized that Christine might have initiated the breakup due to her interest in another person, which they suspected drove a heartbroken John to create the CJ Diaz account as a ruse to exact revenge on Christine. His mother immediately condemned the allegations and even detailed John's whereabouts on March 10th. According to John's mother, he had been tidying up his room in the morning, playing basketball with friends until the late afternoon, and returning home just before 7 p.m. for dinner. After dinner, he went to bed and did not leave the house. This timeline was corroborated by John's basketball companions, who vouched for his presence during those hours. John's brother also spoke up, stating that while he didn't know Christine well, he was aware of her relationship with John. He stated that their relationship lasted only 5 days in June of 2018, after which John quickly moved on to someone else. Despite these assertions, the police continued to pursue their allegations. They suggested that a piece of clothing similar to what was seen in the CCTV footage and a cracked phone that was allegedly damaged during a struggle with Christine constituted sufficient evidence of his guilt. Around this time, the mayor of Lapu-Lapu City suggested that the crime was likely committed by more than one person, prompting immense speculation that John's friends might have been accomplices. At just 16 years old, John was now the #1 suspect behind the murder of Christine, and although there were initial doubts about his involvement in the crime, public opinion was now quickly turning against him. Records state that while John was in custody, the NBI managed to extract a confession obtained from the 16-year-old. However, this confession was made before a lawyer was present, which casted doubts on its legitimacy, especially considering John's status as a minor and the potential for coercion by the authorities. John was later sent for a psychiatric evaluation to determine if he had the capacity to distinguish right from wrong. But at just 16 years old, he might not have realized that passing the test would lead to more severe consequences. Instead, he likely approached it with the intent to perform to the best of his ability. Ultimately, he passed the evaluation, which showed prosecutors that he had a sound sense of reality. It later came as no surprise that these test results were used against him. In court, prosecutors concluded that if he was indeed Christine's killer, he was fully aware of his actions. The police regional office also supported this claim, asserting that John was of sound mind when he allegedly lured, assaulted, stabbed, and mutilated Christine. A statement from the police regional office read, "He possessed the technical skills required. We cannot dismiss the possibility of minors committing crimes as grave as those committed by adults. At this point, it isn't entirely unreasonable to suspect John as the murderer. He did possess a shirt similar to the one seen in the video of Christine's last moments. He did have a cracked phone that could have been damaged during a struggle, and his only alibis came from friends and family, who were understandably inclined to protect him. However, it's important to understand that during John's arrest and the allegations made against him, investigators were remarkably eager to make frequent media statements, proclaiming they had successfully solved the case and apprehended the murderer. They were extremely keen to suggest that the investigation was nearly concluded. Yet the arguments they presented were largely based on John's confession, which was made without a lawyer present. Despite the serious nature of the crime, the evidence seemed a little thin, relying heavily on circumstantial factors rather than concrete proof. Some people couldn't help but wonder if there was a rush to judgment, driven by a need to quell public outrage and deliver swift justice. In light of this, Christine's mother made a public statement, expressing her conviction that John and his accomplices were indeed responsible for her daughter's murder. On April 9, 2019, in a major breaking news announcement, the police introduced a new suspect. Renato Payuban-Lenes, a 43-year-old man already under police surveillance for alleged possession of illegal firearms and drugs, was detained on suspicion of possessing an unlicensed .45 caliber pistol. Though this was a completely separate case from Christine's, Renato did make a chilling confession while in custody. He revealed to officers that he had disguised himself as a teenage boy and used a dummy Facebook account under the name CJ Diaz to lure a teenager into a romantic relationship with him. The name of that teenager was Christine Lee Silawan. Renato's confession naturally raised questions about his connection to the young girl, and it was unusual because he had been arrested on charges of drug consumption and illegal possession of a firearm, nothing to do with the case of Christine. However, he seemed eager to recount the entire story from the beginning, even shedding light on his involvement and the actions leading up to the crime. Renato was a 43-year-old father of 5, and despite having children, he had a disturbing pattern of seeking relationships with much younger girls. On record, he admitted to creating multiple fake accounts on Facebook to lure young teenage girls to talk to him. One of these accounts was named CJ Diaz, the same CJ Diaz that was found in Christine's Facebook Messenger app. Among the many girls that he had managed to talk to, Christine was one of them, and they began talking in late 2018. Their interaction lasted at least 5 months, but one day in March 2019, Christine wanted to meet CJ in real life. And that's when things took a different turn. Believing that CJ was this 16-year-old student, Christine set a date to meet him, but Renato constantly made excuses to avoid meeting her. However, as the tragic day drew nearer, Renato seriously contemplated over whether he should show up. He convinced himself that after all their conversations, she wouldn't reject him. So on March the 10th, he decided to meet her after her church service, confidently waiting near her place of worship. When Christine realized that CJ was actually a middle-aged man and not the teenager she expected, she was understandably shocked. Renato said that Christine wanted to leave immediately, but he was persistent, insisting on escorting her back to her home. Eventually, with no way to dissuade him, Christine reluctantly agreed to walk with him. During their walk, Renato suddenly asked her if she'd like to have sexual intercourse with him, to which she felt immediate disgust and sternly rejected him, stating that she would call her ex-boyfriend John to pick her up. Hearing this, Renato was furious. The rejection and jealousy he felt was overwhelming, and in a fit of rage, he dragged Christine to the empty field. The following accounts are based on several local news reports, detailing what Renato did to her in the open field. Renato says, "I used a dummy Facebook account to lure Christine. We chatted frequently until we became a couple on Facebook. We agreed to meet personally for the first time on March 10th at Sacred Heart Parish in Lapu-Lapu City. We fought on our way to the open field, and that's when I killed her. I just learned that she already had a boyfriend, and I got mad." At the field, 43-year-old Renato used a pair of scissors to stab Christine over 30 times on different parts of her body. The same pair of scissors was later used to peel the skin off her face. He confessed to flaying the skin off her face to prevent her from being identified. He also confessed that he learned the gruesome technique through videos posted on social media sites like Facebook and YouTube. After peeling off her face, Renato took her bag and the pieces of skin, which he discarded a few meters away from the crime scene. Renato admitted to consuming drugs shortly before committing the crime, and has also mentioned that his conscience began to haunt him after hearing the news of her death. While detained at the Lapu-Lapu City police office, Renato said, "I would like to ask forgiveness from Silawan's family. My conscience is bothering me." After his confession, reporters were puzzled and immediately asked him why he had suddenly decided to come forward. Renato replied that he had felt sorry for the 16-year-old John, who in his perspective had wrongfully taken the blame and whose loved ones were being shunned by the public. He couldn't stand to let the young boy be punished for a crime he didn't commit, and Renato mentioned that his confession was just a way to ease his own conscience. While many of the things that Renato did to Christine may not have been confirmed or mentioned by him in reports, it is likely that the true extent of his actions was even more horrifying and may never be fully known. Official records do not clarify what happened to the organs missing from Christine's body, nor do they explain the bite marks on her face or the traces of sulfuric acid found on her body. The autopsy indicated that Christine had been sexually assaulted and her lower garments were missing. However, Renato insisted that he did no such thing. This raised several troubling questions. If Christine was indeed dragged and stabbed in the open field, why did no one report hearing any screams or noise? The field where the crime occurred was situated close to residential homes, and the timing that it happened wasn't very late at night. So how could Renato have dragged a struggling girl, stabbed her, and spent time mutilating her face without any witnesses or anyone hearing a thing? These were just a few of the many inconsistencies that deepen the mystery, and unfortunately, we may never know the truth. As the case moved forward, the anticipation of a trial loomed. But in the year 2020, the COVID-19 lockdown in the Philippines had caused repeated delays, pushing the trial further and further into the future. Then, in a shocking turn of events, on May 24, 2020, it was reported that Renato was found hanging lifeless in the comfort room of his detention cell. Prison guards immediately rushed him to the hospital, but he was declared dead upon arrival. In the Philippines, the death penalty has been prohibited since the year 1987. However, it was reinstated by the Ramos administration in 1993 in response to rising crime rates. It was abolished once more in 2006 under President Gloria Arroyo, and since then, capital punishment has not been practiced in the Philippines. However, Congress still has the power to reinstate it, but it can only be done for exceptionally heinous crimes. The case of Christine Lee Silawan has made many concerned citizens rushing to social media to express their support for capital punishment, especially for serious crimes like rape. Days after the news of Christine aired on national television, the hashtag #YesToDeathPenalty was trending in the Philippines on multiple social media platforms, with netizens calling for the death of those responsible. Netizens cited how sickening the crime was and that no girl or woman should ever feel unsafe while out alone. As for Christine's case, the police have officially declared it closed. However, there are many unresolved questions that continue to haunt the public. Did Renato actually commit this atrocity, or was it John, her ex-boyfriend? Or could it be someone else who managed to completely evade suspicion? Till today, her mother, Mrs. Silawan, continues to carry a haunting feeling that her daughter's killer is still out there, roaming free and unpunished. Heinous, an Asian true crime podcast, is brought to you by One Up Media. This episode was produced and written by Guangjin, edited by Alex, narrated by Jason, audio experience by Ethan Sam, additional engineering by Ashley from One Up Media. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one.